Hello, thank you for tuning into my channel. We're quilting our panels for the t-shirt quilt. So if you want to see how I quilt a block like this, please stay tuned. If you've been following along with this journey, you know that we've been working on these Quilt As You Go panels to make a t-shirt quilt. These are one of my friend's daughter is a senior, and so I'm making a quilt for her. The front of the jerseys or the t-shirts is going to be on the front, and then the back is actually going to be the back of the quilt. So that's the purpose of these Quilt As You Go. The steps for making these blocks was I started with a t-shirt or a jersey, and then I backed with an interfacing. I've made my quilt sandwich with pins in all four corners, and I've also put pins in between each side to get ready for the next step. Another thing that I did before I made my quilt sandwich was I drew a line using a contrasting color 1/2 inch inside the square, and that's all the way around, and it's going to give me kind of a border to stop at, so that when I join the quilt together there will be some looser thread or some fabric that I can join together. You can see that line more clearly along this white panel, and it's going to be, I think that when it's time to join it together, it's going to be a lot easier because I've used, I haven't quilted all the way out to the edge. Alright, so when I was preparing to start this step, the first thing I did was I just took a couple of pieces of the jersey fabric that I had that was left over, and I made a quilt sandwich, and I practiced quilting on this, and it worked out really well for me. So I figured I was ready to go on to the next step. So as I prepared for quilting, the first thing I did was I went to my stash and I pulled out thread, if I had it, to match some of the fabric. So what I tried to do was, if I had extra rayon fabric, since the jerseys aren't 100% cotton, I felt like I was comfortable to use up some of these embroidery threads that I had. So these are, not that one, these are some of the embroidery threads that I had left over from other projects. And then I also just pulled whatever I had from my stash. So when I used this thread on the top, I used a similar color in the bobbin, and it didn't really make a difference. Same thing here, I used a cotton thread in the bobbin, and then until I ran out of thread. And then these were just some extra ones that I had that happened to match some of the jerseys. And I've worked to let the fabrics, let the thread blend in with the fabric. So hopefully it won't really show, even though you can tell it's quilted. We don't want it to really show. One cool thing about using up thread I already had is that I actually used up some bobbins. I have some empty bobbins from what I've already done. So it's very cool. I had to make a couple of changes to my sewing machine. So I'm going to talk about those in the next step when I go to my sewing machine. So when I prepared my my practice sandwich, I used a regular size needle, which is for me an 11 or a 14. And so I wasn't really thinking about that I might need a bigger needle. But when I started stitching, I noticed that even though the front, I was going around the outline of the logo and then just free motion quilting around it, sometimes I ended up going over this vinyl, and so it was a little bit harder to quilt with a 11 or a 14. So I did end up changing my needle to a 16, and it was a little, and it's a heavier needle, I guess, and so it was easier to stitch. So right now I have the 16. It actually says, I think, 100/16 needle, and I'll be quilting with that. I chose to do a meander pattern over the whole quilt. So each panel has this exact same quilting. It has quilting around the logo and then a meander pattern all over it. I felt like that would unify the quilt more, even though I thought about doing a different free motion quilting pattern on each one. But then this one, for me, this is an easy pattern and something that I can do fairly quickly, I guess. So I don't think I made any other changes to the needle or to the sewing machine. I do have my free motion quilting foot on, and what I'm going to do is just start quilting it, and I will talk through it as I quilt it. I'm also going to use my machinger's quilting gloves to help glide the panel through the machine. So I'm going to quilt it now, and we'll see how it turns out. I like to start my panel by bringing the thread up from underneath, from the bottom of the fabric, and then putting it back behind the needle. I have my free motion quilting foot on, and I'm ready to start stitching. I've put on my machinger's quilting gloves, and I'm starting by tracing around the center of the panel. So if there's any kind of decoration on it, I just kind of travel around that first to give me a starting point. So here you can see me just gently going around the edge of the design. I just follow the shape of that until I get it all done. If the design is bigger, of course, it takes a little bit longer, but it also helps me if there's a big design because I don't have a lot of stippling to do. And I'm just taking a gentle stitch around. Sometimes I have to stop to move my hands, and it's kind of a delicate balance to see where how fast you want the needle to go versus how fast you move your hands. But you can do it. If you just keep practicing it, it gets easier. Now I'm moving that thread out of the way. And from this point on, I usually start back where I stopped. At this point, I'm going to start a stippling design. Just doing gentle curves that do not overlap. And this is not a really fast process. It doesn't have to be, especially on such a small panel. And you can see that I'm just moving back and forth with my with the fabric and the needle, just moving the fabric back and forth while the needle kind of draws with the thread. And I moved that pin out of the way so that it didn't get in the way of my stitching. And so sometimes I make a curve and then I kind of go around the curve. I might echo around it, or I might create two curves and then do a curve going in the other direction. All of those will work just to fill up the space. And I was just giving you a sample of this. Now I'm going to go into high speed with this so that you can see it happen for the whole piece. finished block that I've quilted. My battery ran out, so I just finished it off camera. If you have any questions about this technique or about this meander pattern, please leave them in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!